Welcome to the Nordic Mythology podcast. I'm Daniel Farrand of the company Horns of Odin. As always, before we start the show, I do have to plug our Patreon. I say it every single week, but it's the lifeline of the show. It's how we keep it going. So if you can, head over to Patreon/Nordic Mythology podcast. They start from £3 a month, which is the price of buying me or Mags a cup of coffee. Less than coffee is extortionate, but that's a whole different topic. If you can go, like I say, go over to Patreon. You can get the entire back catalogue that you can't get anywhere else. So over 260 episodes at this point with some absolutely amazing guests. You also get the Q&A that we do with our guests that are a bumper part to an episode. Sometimes they're as long as the episode themselves. So if you like a show, you listen to it and you want more from that episode, that guest, then go over to the Patreon. There will be that section or that extra bit, and you also get that for every show we do. And you get one of my favorite parts of the podcast, the Viking smut that myself and Mags do. Myself, Mags, and Claire Moulet, where we read amateur Viking erotica, and it's a lot of fun. We sometimes get really bad ones that are funny. Sometimes we get really good ones that are quite awkward to read with your friends, but in all eventualities, it's fun and leads to a good time. That sounds a bit awkward. Sounds a bit fun, a bit weird.
It's a great pitch there, Dan. It's solid. Hey, just keep going.
I enjoy myself. If you can support Patreon, a 5-star rating, positive review wherever you get your podcasts, and like, share, comment, all those small little things that seem very insignificant, they do help tickle the balls of the algorithm god is what I'm going to go with, since we're on the smut train. And maybe someone new will find the podcast and go to YouTube, hit the subscribe, the bell, all the little euphemisms, hit the like, subscribe, the bell, so you get notified every time we drop a video. But let's get into today's show, which on that note probably is going to end up chaotic with the way the intro's gone. So first, I have to introduce my lovely co-host and in-house archaeologist, Mags Havgar.
Hello. I'm excited about this. I remember we had fun last time. It was the four of us. So yeah. I'm very excited. And on that note, who are we joined by today, Dan?
We are joined by two other archaeologists. We've got a trio of archaeologists and Dan. Is what we've got. So our guest today, the first is Brad Marshall, who is a PhD candidate in archaeology at the University of Leicester, studying late Iron and Viking Age childhoods and the life course. And then we also have Emma Thompson, who is a PhD candidate in archaeology at the University of Leicester. And I was hoping this part was going to be in the top paragraph. It wasn't, but you look at burials. You've been on here 2 times previously, once together, once on your own, I believe, and all the times we look at death and all those joyous things. So welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having us on again.
Sorry for my very long-winded introduction that went off in every which way, but yeah, I remember the last time. Pardon?
I was going to say, Brad felt very bad for how long the bios were. He was just like, maybe we should shorten them down.
Well, yeah, I normally try to. Typically, we use them for his Instagram, and then I'll try and shorten them down for the podcast. And I was hoping it said what you did in the first paragraph, but it didn't. And my face probably was a picture as I realized it wasn't there, and I started to scan lower down. And I was like, actually, I know the answer to this. I can just go with it. But yeah, so we're going to look at burials again from the Viking Age Scandinavia, the British Isles, but this time with a more, as you mentioned, you're wanting to move away from the word deviant. But
I had a couple of pitches on that front. I said, how about we call them quirky burials?
Quirky burials. Yeah. But so we're looking at maybe the strange, the odd, the unusual burials.
The atypical.
Yeah. Exactly.
That one wasn't mine. That was Dan, our previous guest, who, when I said quirky, he went, you could also say atypical. And I was like, that's a much more academic way of phrasing it, actually.
Yeah. But yeah, we mentioned before that maybe we could start with why you're moving away from the term deviant burials. Yeah.
So deviancy as a concept, or deviant burial as a concept in archaeology, it kind of comes from British archaeology. So it starts with Roman and Anglo-Saxon archaeologists, particularly the work of Helen Geek, who identifies there are what's a term that we can use when someone really stands out from what is the norm in a given cemetery context. And I think that seemed to hold up for a while within British archaeology, and then it was borrowed into Viking Age archaeology, and particularly the work of Eva Tate. Hope I'm pronouncing that right. She published a book in which she outlines some of the key things that help us identify what makes a deviant burial in a Viking Age context. So things like body positioning, orientation, different grave goods, whether the body had been mutilated or either ante-mortem or post-mortem, different burial forms, all kinds of things. But in recent years, particularly the work of Matthias Toplak and Leszek Gardewa, they've started to heavily critique this idea of deviancy. And now with changes in both mortuary archaeology, but also archaeological theory, and the new stuff coming in from bioarchaeological analyses of graves, we're really starting to get a different picture, and we're starting to approach these in new and different ways. And like Mike said, atypical is actually like a phrase that is much more commonly now applied to graves, and it seems it's a lot more. It holds a lot more water, I would say, than deviancy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Let's say.
I don't know what this says about me, but I always, as soon as I hear the word deviant or deviancy, I think sexual. And I don't know why. I don't know. I always put those two together. So obviously when you said deviant graves, I know that that's not what it is, and I know the actual meaning of it. But for whatever reason, that word kind of sticks with like a sexual nature to it.
But I don't think that's strange at all, because when you hear historical records of, queer people, how they've been condemned in very recent history, deviancy was the word used often.
Yeah.
Well, it's a very loaded term, isn't it? It's not even sort of saying the burials of criminals or the burials of like ostracized peoples or exiled peoples. It's deviants, which does have that kind of almost Christian judgment aspect to it as well.
Yeah, there's like a moral component.
Yeah.
So all that to say, Dan, I feel like all of us kind of get where it come from.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So when although like we're not, or you're trying to not use the term deviant burial because it doesn't fit the best, but what does that entail? What would that look at? What would class as an atypical burial? I do like the word deviant burial, though. I know it's maybe problematic, but it sounds fun. Sounds naughty.
I think it's kind of, you kind of take it on a case-by-case basis, and it's when something really stands out for you from either a cemetery context, or something we can probably get into a little bit later is burials outside of cemetery context that are really interesting. But when so we can give an example, like prone burials. So when an individual is buried, instead of supine on their back, they're buried face down, has traditionally been seen as an indicator of deviancy, or them being ostracized or treated in a different way by their community in death. Or perhaps decapitation of the body, or being placed in a very strange body position. I can give a good example from Fjellkinga. There's a grave of a woman who's bound so tightly in a fetal position in a really, really tiny pit underneath the burial of another adult male. So they've been effectively squashed into this burial, and then they're buried at the same time. So there's something really interesting going on here, and that's kind of like deviant, atypical.
Okay, interesting.
It does feel deviant.
Well, I mean, Dan, at least let's try to not use the term, though, if that's something that Brad and Emma are like actively moving away from.
It just
we've given it its time in the set. Like we can.
I don't know what a
we
better
just take
word.
a shot every time.
I don't know a better word to describe a woman bound in a fetal position, buried underneath a male. What better word is there? That's
Atypical.
pretty
Unusual.
Yeah, but because the problem with like framing every atypical burial as a deviant burial is we're kind of assuming that a different burial style inherently means moral like inferiority or sort of a judgment there. Whereas sometimes one thing that Brad and I spoke about is these sort of elite ship mound burials and things like that. They are atypical burials, but we wouldn't describe them as deviant because there's a sort of degree of respect there, but that they are atypical. These are not common burials.
Nope. That's a very good point, actually, because there is an implicit like recency kind of moral bias then with how the term deviant is applied.
Yeah, I am playing the fool. I do understand the want to move away, but obviously,
but it's fun though. I get it.
We can look. you could look at a burial that is odd by today's standards, and you're looking through today's lens. But maybe it was a respectful burial back then, but we just don't know it. But it just looks like maybe it's. I'm not going to say the D word. So I do get it. We are applying like the modern lens to it. I just get the feeling that the lady wrapped isn't a good one, but maybe I'm wrong. Maybe that was a sign of respect, but my little feelings tell me maybe not.
I mean, sometimes it could also be sort of pragmatism and practicality, because Brad giving that example has made me think of an example at Raunds in Northamptonshire, where they believe a woman was originally buried in a coffin, and then they moved her out of the coffin so someone else could be buried in there. And as far as we know, they put her bones into a sack and just buried the sack. And that obviously looks very disrespectful, but there is a degree of like, this person may have needed the coffin more for whatever reason, and they kind of were just getting rid of the secondary skeletal material. And we know from some of the literary evidence in Iceland that as long as you bury the person properly the first time, how you move their bones the second time is less important, because cemeteries moved and things like that. Yeah. The first burial is more important than the second one in a lot of the mythology. So it might look strange to us, but it isn't inherently a moral judgment necessarily.
Yeah. It's kind of like, as long as the flesh has been given the time to rot away and there's only bones left, like there's some stuff we could speculate on in that respect.
So maybe they get to where they're going.
Yeah.
And
their flesh vehicle has dissolved, so now
the meat suit is no longer needed.
The meat suit. I love that. But so kind of what parameters, I mean, I feel like I always throw this at you guys, particularly you, Emma, every time you're here, but like, be warned, I'm going to throw you a pretty big question, and then you can decide where you want to go with that. But like, how do you classify something as an atypical burial? Like, what parameters are used? I am asking, knowing what the parameters are, but perhaps for our listeners, like, what is it? Just in heavy quotation marks, the impression of the archaeologist, or is it something that has to be done kind of comparatively with other burial material from the same period? Or how does that process, like, how is something classified as an atypical burial?
Yeah, so I guess purely from a methodological kind of point of view is you really need to be okay with zooming in and out of different scales of things. So it's a case of, at least for me, and I think Brad does a very similar thing, it's a case of you compile lots of data from different cemeteries sort of across wherever you're looking at. You put in all the, this was a coffin burial, this was in the earth, it goes this direction. And then you do that sort of quantitative stats analysis of just seeing, like, actually, what is the most common thing, for me, like across Denmark as a whole, but then sort of region by region. And then the things that then stick out from those stats, you start poking at a bit more carefully. But it's kind of what I said earlier of like the burials that seem more exciting because they are atypical are atypical. So sometimes we get a bit carried away with like, oh, but there's a really weird thing happening here, but it's one burial in like 700.
Yep.
So how much do we lose sight of what the reality of death was for most people by getting excited by like oh, this person's upside down kind of thing?
Yeah. So I was just going to say, if you were to add on that, you can. So you start at like a cemetery scale, and if something jumps out at you at that cemetery, are they atypical for that cemetery? So then you zoom out a little bit more. Are they atypical for the region? Are there parallels in? So you're working in Denmark. Are there other parallels on the same island? Then are there other parallels in Denmark? Are there other parallels in Scandinavia or the wider diaspora? So prone is a good example. So at a cemetery like Bøjve in Denmark, there's one prone individual. So they really stand out. But then you zoom out to Denmark and there are more and more prone. And then you factor in a site like Schoppersvik in Gotland, and their prone is so common. It's actually been used as a site that Matthias Toplak has used to deconstruct the idea of deviancy because of how frequently it occurs at this singular site. So there are different scales of things going on and different ways to approach it once you zoom in and out, like Emma says.
Yeah. That's very interesting. Also, I am so sorry about this, Brad, but can I just, you're saying prone as in face down, correct?
Yeah,
yes, because
prone.
My American heirs heard prawn for a second, so I was like, as in shrimp. So I just wanted to make sure we're talking prone as in face down. Yes. I'm so sorry.
Is it, I guess, well, it is definitely possible that if you have the one in Denmark, or do you say Gotland, where it was more common?
Yeah, in Gotland to Schoppersvik.
Yeah.
Gotland does a lot of weird stuff.
Yeah, it could be, I guess, different areas. I guess one could be seen as disrespect and one could just be, this is how we do it.
This is how we do
it's
it.
one thing that I've learned from the podcast a lot over the years is that this idea of a singular like Viking ideology just doesn't exist. So if you have one thing in Denmark and another kind of thing in Gotland, I guess one could the isolated instances could be just a negative thing, possibly. Is it thought to be a negative?
It's a really good point and a really good question. I think we talked about it last time. We were on about how there is no universal Viking burial suite that you find across the Scandinavian world and then the diaspora. So this idea that there's sort of homogeneity that's found around the world and that you can do that, and the same is therefore true for atypical burials. What's going on in all over the different parts of the Viking world is a culturally situated in their time and place. But what people have tried to do is try and what would be the motivations behind burying somebody in a prone position as opposed to supine when everyone else in the cemetery. So one of the things that has been suggested, especially when there are other things factored in, like a Bøjve, they're not only prone, but they have stones placed on top of them. So this is seen as like they're placed in the grave. Bøjve grave P. I'm going to keep bringing it up because it keeps getting stranger and stranger. Possibly this is an indicator that they were either a criminal or they were some kind of magic worker who has to be constrained in death because they're dangerous in their death and they have to be prevented from rising from the dead or continuing to work evil beyond the grave. That's something that has been discussed before. And to add again to this Bøjve grave P, it's possible that they might have even been. It's been suggested that they might have even been killed in situ, because there is a knife stuck into the ground inside the grave. So lots of weird things like that going on, and that does get discussed in the saga. I know, right?
That's intense.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Is that in a more, I guess, literal sense to stop them getting up like a Draugr type situation, or do you think it's to stop them going to where if we have this idea that when they're buried, they believe that they go to a different place, whether it's Valhalla or hell or wherever, that those rocks would pin the kind of soul in position.
I think we just have to caveat that by saying that this is being read back from those later, the high medieval Icelandic sagas and other sources which sometimes mention stoning in burial. And we're reading this back from a Christianized perspective, where they would view certain pagan or pre-Christian ideas as being inherently related to like evil and draugrs and things like that, and some of the quite fantastical elements. But that's not to say that ontology, that worldview didn't actually exist in the Viking Age, and people would have wanted to prevent people from rising from the dead, like draugrs in that Icelandic context. Yeah.
I think there's something to be said for, at least my understanding of sort of what's in the Icelandic sagas, is undeath tends to be more physical than sort of Christian beliefs around it. Sort of, I would associate kind of the Norse stuff with zombies, revenants, draugr, whereas Christianity starts leaning into ghosts and spirits. So there's a more corporeal death, I think, to some of the pagan stuff, which might be feeding into this. But again, it's reading back from sagas.
Sure. But if one is then inclined to extrapolate from that, one could potentially interpret this then as being like a physical restraining of a potential undeath something or other. Maybe.
I think there's also something to be said for earlier in the Viking Age, you do get more burial reopening than you do later on.
Yeah.
So that sort of idea of revisiting a grave, so there might be more impetus to kind of protect the inside of the grave than there would be later if you're going to go back to it, for example.
Yeah.
Okay, so the body that you mentioned, this prone with the stones on, is that isolated to itself, or are all prone burials the same with this stack of rocks found on them? Is there like a uniformity in the prone burials?
No, not at all. This is the Boivai grave P does really, really stand out. But you do get stones being placed on bodies or around bodies or in different positions on bodies, is also a feature that you encounter across the Viking Age. So there are, I can think of another example where stones are being piled on somebody's feet, but they're supine, they're laying on their back. So there's not quite the same association, but yeah, stones in burial. Emma has done a lot of thinking about stones in burials recently, and it's very interesting.
Yeah, it's become my like side hustle with a PhD. So the thing I find really interesting about stones and burials, particularly comparing at the very least Denmark to England, for example, is in sort of late Anglo-Saxon England, you tend to get stones used as kind of pillowing. So either like a very literal stones behind the head or a couple of different stones. It's a very sort of protective thing. In terms of Denmark, stone pillows really aren't a thing, even sort of creeping into the more Christian periods. You will get a lot of stones on top of the body, not a lot of stones underneath. The only place that kind of gets anywhere close is Sebesund, which is North Jutland, and is sort of one of the best kind of more definitively Christian cemeteries we have in Denmark. But they use turf, so earth rather than stone, which is kind of an interesting variation of the stone pillow style. And it's not that they didn't have access to stone, because they do have a couple of kist burials there. It's just they chose to use turf for whatever reason. But it is, very interesting that the Danish stuff seems to be stones on the body rather than under the body. And then just in general, the reason why stones have become such a big thing for me is more so even than like, what is a Viking burial? A late Anglo-Saxon burial is seen to be very homogenized. And actually, the more I dig into it, stone usage seems to be a really big variant in terms of how people are using stones in burials. So I think that might be where the interesting diversity of late Anglo-Saxon stuff is.
Oh, fun.
Okay.
Yeah.
I
just send Brad pictures of random burials all the time. He's just like, yes, all stones.
Could the stone placement I don't know. I guess again, it's getting out of my own modern thought because I feel like placing stones on a body feels disrespectful. Placing them under it, not as much. That's just again probably.
So, counter argument: if we see stones as pillows, could we also see stones as blankets?
Yeah.
Maybe, but it just doesn't feel quite as nice. But again, that's
I
probably
mean,
my
people
again more
love-
modern lens.
Weighted blankets.
People
man.
love a weighted blanket. Yep.
Yeah. Well, yeah, weird
also,
blanket, not stone blanket. That's different.
If your family wants to make sure that you're all, snugly protected, no one, it's going to be such an effort to ransack your burial if you're covered by like stones and boulders.
Well, this is the thing, right? It depends on, I guess, what side of the stones you're looking at. Because yes, if you're looking at stones as on top of the body, then that could feel quite constraining. But if you're looking at stones as protection from above, then that is quite a nice, caring act.
Yep.
When you say stones, how big are we talking?
It really depends. There's no standard. You'll get sort of stone pillows, for example, which is just 2 big stones, or you'll get stone pillows that are like 7 smaller ones. There really isn't any kind of common style. It's not just one block stone all the time.
Yeah, because if it was like a blanket, like you said with a blanket or like protection, does that mean there's enough to cover the entire? Because if it's enough to cover the entire body, head to toe, and like I don't know, fist-sized stones,
Yeah.
I'm like, yeah,
akin to like a
fair enough.
quilted blanket type situation.
Yeah, like I get that, but if it's just like some big fuck off boulders like the size of my massive head, I feel like that feels quite disrespectful to just drop one of those on somebody.
But the quilted thing is actually really interesting because one thing that I'm playing around with stones at the moment is it's almost very easy to write stones off as just completely natural. There's no man making involved versus artifacts, for example. But where did they pick the stones from?
Yeah.
Do these stones have meaning? Do they come from places that are important to the deceased or the family? Like there could actually be a lot of intention and decision and agency in where do we get the stones from?
Is there any tooling on the stones? Is there, like anything to maybe make them a bit softer?
Not from memory.
Nice and gentler?
Don't think so.
Okay. But so you see, it seems those stones can be used in a nice way. But Brad mentioned before, this idea that somebody had their feet covered by stones. Now, when we say stones, it depends. I don't know why the size of the rock feels like it makes a difference. I don't know. A bigger rock feels more aggressive in kind of my mind, but covering someone's legs to me straight away, I think, oh well, maybe they fled from something they weren't meant to, as in like it was symbolic of a crime, possibly, rather than a nice thing.
Not only do we get, not only is there example of those stones over the feet, but there are some indications that some people's feet were bound, physically bound, tied to prevent either possibly to prevent them from leaving. This we can bring in here the famous example from Gardrup in Denmark. So this is a super interesting burial. There's a double burial of a male and a female. The male is bound, and it looks like he'd been hanged due to markings on the cervical vertebra. And for a long time, it was thought that this was a deviant burial, an atypical burial of 2 people who were possibly sailor workers, or the female was a sailor worker and this was her slave, and they're killed and they're placed in this thing to mark them out being very different members of the community. But recent genetic work on this grave has confirmed that the genetic kinship between the 2 individuals is so close that it's actually quite likely that they're mother and son and not some sort of magic worker and a possible
but
slave.
That makes it worse
deviant.
somehow. But I feel like feel like I'm having like, that makes me picture like some sort of horrible scene involving like a family or something.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, yeah, we do have there's a famous family in Laxdala saga who they come from the Hebrides and they go to Iceland and they work magic, and there's such a terror to the community that the community eventually says, "Nah, this is too much," and it effectively puts them to death. And then I think they're stoned to death, and they're then buried in graves packed with stones. But even beyond the grave, they continue to work all kinds of stuff. So they dig them up and then they bury them somewhere else, and sometimes even. They don't just dig them up, but they're such a terror beyond the grave. And I'm not an Old Norse specialist, but sometimes they're such a terror from beyond the grave that a normal grave setting isn't enough. They have to be cremated, and their ashes have to be scattered far and wide.
Yeah.
So,
I think there's also an example in one of the sagas where someone was considered such a dangerous person in death that their body was completely dismembered and thrown into the sea, something along those lines.
Yes. That is.
My brain is saying Niall's saga, but I might be very wrong. But I think there is a tale of someone was considered such a danger that they was split apart, so they couldn't reform. And
could be Eyjabrekka saga.
Yeah.
But that to us also, again, with the modern lens, does sound like very horrific and extreme to a certain degree. But I would also say, kind of harking back to our earlier point about pragmatism, there is an argument to be made that also is a very pragmatic, like better safe than sorry approach.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. One thing, I guess, in this, is deviant a good term, modern biases thing that comes up, and something like Brad and I have spoken about recently is we've kind of gotten better in academia about saying, well, our ideas of gender in the modern day are kind of based in Victorian sort of discussions, and lots of categories are very Victorian and everything's built from that. But I think we also have to give credit to the fact that our ideas of death and burial and what is a good or bad burial or a way of treating the dead is quite bound up in the Victorian period as well.
Yeah.
So, what we think is nasty or, sounds a bit unpleasant might actually be a very practical way of dealing with death under those parameters.
Yeah. 100%.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. Reminds me of, is it Warren Percy, the medieval village that's abandoned? And I'm pretty sure there was some people that were exhumed, and then their bones were, I think, like broken and set on fire and defamed, and then buried outside of this like little village limits, because I can't remember the reason. Maybe it was witchcraft or something. Maybe. It seems like that similar sort of idea that you kind of have to get rid of the bones, get rid of the body, and you'll be possibly free from it. And I think we'd probably all do the same if we felt we were being haunted by something or cursed by something. The natural thing is to get rid of the thing that you think is doing the cursing.
I mean, it is kind of like just giving your bathroom a deep clean if everyone in the house has had a really bad case of the flu.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a weird comparison, but at the same time, when you're in that kind of pattern of thinking, I'm like, it's hard for me to demonize or to be like, oh, look how weird they are. And it's like, if someone around here, like if I lived with a bunch of people and we all had COVID, like we would deep clean the apartment afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
And if something weird's been happening in your village and the people responsible like die or something, and we're like, oh, it's due to those people, then why wouldn't we like?
Yeah. Do we see anything like that, like from a possible sickness or a plague? Any burials where that might play a role? 'Cause I assume like illness like that will have been around. I don't really know of any like major sickness epidemics or pandemics in the Viking Age, but surely there must have been something. Do we see like how they treat that? Like these people need to go be buried over there?
Not that I'm aware of, that there's this sort of like segmenting of cemetery populations on the basis that there had been some sort of pandemic or an outbreak or something. But Caroline Asini Swedish archaeologist, has done quite a lot of work on leprosy and how that's found in cemetery populations. But again, they don't seem to be, from memory, they're not ostracized. They're not peripheral. You don't have like a lepers section of
That's really
of your
interesting,
cemetery.
considering how they would be treated in other parts of history.
Yeah, I don't think the rates of leprosy are high enough in this period. They kind of shoot up a bit in the sort of later medieval periods, but I think they're still relatively low at the moment. The only thing I can think of is I know that there's one kind of mass burial in Herdeby, which used to be sort of southern Denmark, is now Germany. It's an 11-person burial, which suggests maybe there was a reason to bury people together quickly, but I don't know what the sort of illnesses or pathologies look like for those skeletons.
No.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I mean, the only type of I mean, I guess because we have so few contemporaneous sort of historical written documents, the way that we are kind of used to from a modern day perspective, like it's hard to know sometimes the evidence that we're looking at whether or not this could be like some sort of evidence from an outbreak or a plague or something going around. Because the only one that I can think of that would be even close to the Viking Age, but still not the Viking Age, would be the much bigger Justinian plague in like the 500s AD. So I assume that there would have been some sort of like collective memory of like insane illness, but I can't recall any cases of proof of stuff happening in the Viking Age or seeing that in the mortuary behavior.
Yeah, we're also kind of in an interesting crossover period in terms of burial practice, with a lot of Scandinavia, for a fair amount of the Viking Age, still cremating their dead.
Yeah.
So it's a case of we can't necessarily see illness if they burned the body rather than buried the body as was.
Maybe they were ahead of the curve and we're just
Yeah.
get rid of that. Okay. What about like ones that we can clearly see it's the burial is done in a disrespectful manner? Do they exist, or are they all kind of open to question? Or are the ones where we're like, this person has done something wrong, they've been a naughty boy or girl, so
my devil's advocate question to that is, what are you considering disrespectful?
That's why I was giggling, because I was like, I love that you're posing these questions to three archaeologists, especially three archaeologists from the same generation, because I feel like we'd all be like, well, it would all depend on your point of view now, wouldn't it?
Am I right in thinking, is there one where somebody's head's
do they
cut
have
off and put between their
have they
legs?
been staked through their
There are a
bum?
few.
Their head is in another place. Limbs are chopped off.
Head of the ass doesn't feel like in any situation it would be positive.
Counterpoint to the like head on the lap thing, though, is if it was inherently disrespectful, a lot of effort has been put into putting the head on the lap. Because if you didn't care, you would just kind of have the head anywhere.
But there's a difference between like somebody who's pissed you off a bit or you've killed them in a fight, but then there's somebody who's like done something really nasty to your family or loved ones. Then you would go out of that extra bit of care to be like, you know what, you're going into Valhalla with your head up your ass, and that's gonna show them you have to try and fight like that.
I think the big problem here is that where we encounter quite a lot of these burials is in cemeteries. And if you're disrespecting somebody, you don't bury them in your community cemetery.
That's true.
So there's clearly some sort of weird. It's almost, what's a good way to phrase it? But they need to be marked out, or they are marked out in death for some kind of reason. But it's not a reason that means that they're totally out of your community now.
So one actual good example, I think, which is a good counterpoint to the decapitated skeletons with the head in the lap, because that to me, obviously it's not great that they've been decapitated. That doesn't feel very nice, but the head and lap feels like there's still some sort of respect there. One good example where it feels a bit more disrespectful, might have been a murder sort of thing, is in Aarhus in central Jutland in Denmark. They found a decapitated skeleton underneath a pit house, and that head was missing. And that's obviously in a pit house rather than a cemetery. So that feels a bit more like that person might have been murdered and sort of buried where they were. And we know from a lot of the saga stuff that actually being buried in settlements, and particularly in doorways and things like that, that's bad juju, basically. Like that's not a good thing.
The
So that one
house
feels more like,
or the buried person.
The people in it.
Okay.
It's not a good thing to have people buried in thresholds and things like that.
I'm more thinking, not like, I guess, if you murder someone, that's bad. That's clearly,
we're talking
like
the Viking Age.
I'm
not saying they were murderous bastards, but they also were like, I feel like that's.
But that's what I mean, is that's like the act in life that then leads to them being dead, and you just kind of, maybe you need to get rid of the body. I'm more thinking somebody's died, whether they've been killed by the community in some sort of what's the word? Begins with X.
Execution.
Executed by the community, or for whatever reason they've wronged someone and they've been given the go ahead to kill them. But then the body has been particularly like mutilated in some way, or defamed, or left with clear disrespect. Does that exist? Is that a thing that's like, this person's been so bad in life that we're going to go above and beyond to kind of damage it? I guess, again, without knowing the intent, because I would say like setting fire to maybe parts of the body, but then maybe that's a good thing. I don't know.
I was going to say, I think it's interesting, again, thinking from a Danish context, that in the Iron Age, we obviously have a lot of bog bodies where these are kind of believed to be ritual executions, and we can kind of see that by the number of injuries on the body. Obviously, bog bodies are better preserved because the water content preserves tissue better. But I can't, off the top of my head, think of any obvious kind of like execution burials in cemeteries. Because again, Brad makes the really interesting point of, if you've executed them, why are they in your cemetery?
Yeah, you would maybe then assume that those burials are isolated in some way. If they did go out of their way to make that burial, the interior of the burial and the positioning of the body, like go out of their way to make that disrespectful or strange or kind of weird, perhaps that burial hasn't been discovered because it's kind of out of the way. It's not where you'd find other burials, because the whole point was that this person would be ostracized, maybe.
Yeah.
So therefore, it wouldn't, occur in a lot of the grave material we usually have from cemeteries.
Unless, because
you're really like driving. You're not letting this go. I love it.
Unless,
I think I can throw you a bone, Dan.
No.
Like.
Hey! I've got something. Before this leaves my mind, then I'll catch the bone. Unless, if you have a culture that believes that the soul is going to go somewhere and be in an afterlife around maybe your loved ones or for whatever, maybe burying them or just killing them outside the community and leaving them wouldn't achieve that goal, if you believe that they have to be in the graveyard or within the community when they're buried. So therefore you would bury them in the cemetery, but you would maybe fuck with the body a little bit, so when they did
so
go,
can keep an eye on it, kind of.
No, so it's basically, because it's such a disrespect. It's like, I'm going to send you to the afterlife, but you're going to be maimed in some way or marked or damaged. So then when you go, everybody knows that you were a shitty person. So this kind of this shittiness that you've been in life is going to carry on there, because everyone's going to see it and judge you forever, for all of eternity, which feels like an even bigger punishment than like not letting them go. It's like, well, you're going to go with the mark on you. Is that possible? I'm really clutching now.
What I can say is that the project that Emma and I connected to at Leicester, the Body Politics Project, has been looking across the Long Iron Age at particularly depositions in settlement contexts. And our colleagues have come across some really interesting cases of bodily mutilation, all kinds of treatment, people being partially burned, and then ending up in all kinds of weird things. And that a lot of this is going to get published very soon. So there's some exciting news coming out on that front very soon from our project. But if you want an execution burial, there is one outside of Scandinavia, the Dorset Ridgeway burials. And that's a mass grave of adult males in their late teens to, I want to say up to about 40. It's been suggested that they're possibly some sort of Joms Viking like raiding party that comes to England, and they get slaughtered, and their bodies have been decapitated, hacked to pieces, and then they're effectively chucked into a pit. So these are people who've come from Scandinavia to England, and then the Anglo-Saxons treat them in a very disrespectful way.
Before we go into that, Brad, did you just honeydick us by saying, yes, there is an answer, but we're going to have to come back in future to discuss? Is that what just happened?
Maybe. I also don't want to get in trouble with my boss.
Okay.
Fair enough.
We will.
Fair enough.
You let us know when that's out, and I'll go down my little rabbit hole once again.
But I will say, giving you a mass burial, literally a pit full of bones, Dan, is Brad throwing you a hell of a lot of bones.
A bone. Nice.
Yeah.
Well, can we take, because obviously, again, we don't know why these things were done to the bodies because we can't ask the people that did it, and there's no written record. But if you have an example like that, or examples of what the Anglo-Saxons have done to, Scandinavian bodies, you would assume how the enemy treats the body is then seen as a negative thing, and you could maybe use that to apply to Scandinavian burials, maybe, because they're like, oh, that's a disrespect. Can you look at those burials and maybe apply the same idea? That it's like, this seems to be some kind of disrespectful thing in the age.
Yes. And I'm going to caveat this again by saying one of the things that we have to maybe move away from, and this is something Emma and me have written about, is about how bodily norms, how the Vikings thought about bodies. We have to move away from this perhaps false cultural intimacy that we have with the Vikings, first of all, and how we think about our bodies and how they thought about theirs. And also we're living in this post-Enlightenment way where we have this medicalized machine-like body, which is it's bodily integrity, and the body being whole is very important to us in life and death. And if something goes wrong with the body or something is changed about a body, broadly speaking, we see that as like a detrimental deficit or a damage that's been done to it. But it doesn't seem that the Vikings held this kind of idea that the body had to remain whole either in life or death, and if it didn't, that this was necessarily a negative. So that's why you find bones being removed from graves and taken to other contexts. All these kinds of things going on. So once you factor that in as well, it's even harder to try and pick out if there's something going on in burial, which means that this person was being treated in a really negative light, or whether this is just something that's totally normal, or even does this mean that they're perhaps an even more respected person in their community because they received specialized treatment.
That's a really good point. That's a really good point. And this is not related to burials at all, but that just got me thinking, because I'm sitting there looking at my drawings of the Oseberg tapestries right now, and something that stuck out to me a lot is that, like, there is never like a required amount of limbs, which I find odd. So that's a different thing for a different time. But I just wanted to throw you guys a bone. That is also interesting. That even in the imagery, like limbs and like features, there's no set requirements seemingly.
Yeah, well, like one of the points Brad and I kind of make in that article we've done about the body is like there is no standard body in the modern day. Like when we look at skeletal analysis, for example, there are so many skeletal anomalies that you might find on the body that, like, when you're learning how to do osteology, you'll sort of turn to the teacher and be like, what is this weird lump on the bone? Is it a disease? And they're like, no, sometimes that just happens. Like,
Yeah.
there is no standard body now. There was probably no standard body back then.
But that actually gets me kind of, I'm sorry if I'm cutting you off, Dan. Were you gonna say something else? Because something that we've kind of been doing implicitly now, which is obvious because we are 4 humans speaking about a human past, but we've kind of implicitly been talking about burials as something that is inherently human. So atypical non-human burials, is that a thing?
Yes.
Yeah. And maybe like a little fun fact for all the non-archaeologists watching, me even calling it non-human instead of animal is a little thing if you want to get into archaeological theory, but that's a different topic for a different day. But non-human atypical
Max
burials.
getting on the post-human hype. Post-human hype.
Multi-species theory. Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, I saw you nodding, Brad. Is it a thing?
Yeah, it is. In Iceland, you get horse burials. In fact, there's grave complexes or cemetery layouts where it seems like horses are actually the focus of. There are more burials of horses than there are of people, and they have their own burials. They're not commingled. They're their own thing. But then you get commingled horse-human, horse-animal.
That's a thing that keeps striking me, like with material evidence and with burial evidence and with imagery or like iconographical language or whatever you want to call it. The Vikings, the more I look at stuff, they seem to be just die-hard horse girlies, all of them.
I guess that makes sense. But if you're a warrior, or even not, if you just have a farm and you have a horse that plows the field really fucking good and gives you a good yield of crops.
This motherfucker
like knows. It's such a such a relationship with animals. I don't, today we have such a close relationship with animals, and they're mainly our pets that kind of just sit on our knees and we stroke them, and so it's not one way. That the love is 2 ways, but it's not the same, I guess, working relationship that it used to be. There used to be that dependency on an animal, whether it was a dog to notify you of enemies or incoming creatures, or a horse that you would ride into battle, or to pull the plow. There's that dependency on that animal, on that connection and that real kind of togetherness, I guess. And then if you've, particularly in a war setting, if you've ridden a horse successfully and won battles and survived, you probably attribute that to the horse in some way for its speed and its dexterity, and maybe it booted that guy in the head that time and saved you. So when then it passes from maybe natural causes or it's killed it, you would want to give it a nice little send off, surely.
Yeah, well, this is something that someone else on our project is doing her research on, and she's brilliant. So Renata Larson, she's looking at horses, dogs, and sheep/goats and how they experience the Viking Age. And part of what she's done, which I have really adopted in my practice now, is I think for a long time, if there were animals in the grave with a human, a lot of archaeologists used to see that as a grave good. It used to be something given to the human. Yep. Whereas now we're in a place where a lot of other scholars, I think Harriet Evans Tang is doing a bit on horses as well, where no, actually this is more likely to be a co-burial. Just because it's a non-human doesn't necessarily mean it's a grave good for the human. And it's something I do a bit of with objects as well. Like sometimes is a grave actually more akin to an object hoard with a human in rather than a grave with objects in.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. We're going to have to sort that out as an episode, because as a huge animal lover, an episode on animals in the Viking Age just seems like, I say like heaven, but maybe they're not treated that well, so it might be sad. I don't know.
Yeah, I was gonna say
maybe it can be really sad, and I'm just sat here crying the whole way through. Like, oh, poor dogs.
In burials, it's gonna be pretty sad, unfortunately, because as a fellow animal lover, this is hard to say and also hard to hear. But what happens to these animals that they end up in burials as well? Perhaps it's lovely to think that they all died of natural causes, but in quite a lot of cases, there's probably quite a lot of blood and horror and screaming that goes into getting animals into burials. And you find mutilated animals, and also a very sad example, which is it's a super fascinating. It's an atypical grave. It's a 3-layered grave from Sweden.
3-layered meaning
And
it's happened 3 times after each other, or at the same time, and they've been piled on top of each other.
Yeah, it seems like this is constructed as one grave setting at the same time, and on the bottom layer is a child, on the middle layer is a child, and on the top layer is a dog and a puppy. And because of the age differences,
Brad, you brought it down last time, and you've done it again this time as well.
I bring the mood down.
What's worse than a burial with 2 children and a dog and a puppy as well?
I know. Must I live so fiercely in the present and reality? No. Sometimes it's nice to just...
It's nice to just bask in the horrors of the past. Is that what you're saying?
I'm saying it's the opposite. Maybe I just need to step back from the horrors.
Yeah.
Remember that not everyone wants to think about the horrors.
No, it's
but
important. It is important. I'm kidding.
To add to the horrors, there are quite a few burials in Denmark where piglets are in the grave with people. So yeah, there are a lot of young animals going in as well.
Yeah, and to add to the horror, I would say that the horses from Oseberg, at least I'm so like tunnel focused on Oseberg, but that's because that's what I'm working on. Have been shown to have gigantic immediate perimortem holes in their foreheads, which is likely killed them. Some sort of sharp or blunt object to the head, probably at the site of the burial, and then their heads were chopped off and piled.
That's no different to how an abattoir kills an animal today. So it's not.
But we don't like to think about that, though, do we?
Well, that's what I mean. It's just that's just a bolt gun to the head, which is the exact same thing, and it's we can. It sounds so sitting here thinking about them killing animals to put into graves and the way they're being killed seems so horrible, but you only have to take a minute to look at the horrors that we do to animals every single day in the meat industry. That we're not exactly any better. We just like to think we are because it's hidden behind a non-disclosure agreement and in a little warehouse somewhere and hidden away. It's the same shit. So there's no. I don't think we can judge them based on how any of these animals. We fucking eat veal and foie gras. That's not exactly anything that we can kind of preach about of kindness to animals.
No.
So that's my little rant, I guess.
But I'm I don't know how much, like, if you have more kind of details about the burial that brought it all down, Brad. But kind of, this might just be me speculating based on pretty much nothing, but kind of in the vein of what we were discussing earlier with the thought of maybe something being placed on you is actually protective, could perhaps that burial be seen in a similar light?
Yeah, I think that's very possible. That that this dog and this puppy are placed also on top of the burial as a protective thing. They're protecting these 2 children.
Yeah.
In their deathscape.
Do you think one child was favoured over the other because one was placed above the other, or it was?
There's an age difference, so it could be the age.
So the oldest is at the bottom, or reversed.
You're testing me now.
Oh, okay, well, never mind then.
I can't remember off the top of my head, but I think one of them is 9 to 12 months, and the other one is a little bit older.
Holy shit!
Okay, so yeah, they're
infants.
Kind of the baby, yeah, rather than. Well, shit. That makes it even sadder.
But imagine this. Okay, yeah, that is horrible. But imagine this lovely thought of those close to the children being like, it is unthinkable to send them into wherever they're going without the dogs.
How old are the dogs?
I don't know how old the adult dog is, but
But it's
the
an
pup
adult.
is quite young.
Yeah.
It's an adult and a pup. Yeah.
I was thinking if it was symbolic of the two children, because obviously dogs grow up quicker than humans. So, you can have what seems to be
Slightly.
an adult dog within 12 months.
Yeah.
So
it's very possible, that they grew up at the same time.
That's quite. It's very. Yeah,
But
it just feels
but
like
it
maybe
makes me kind of it makes me weirdly like comforted that they're neither of those deceased persons, whether they be of canine or human origin, are alone. They're together in a big burial hug.
Yeah, it is. It's somber, but it's quite sweet. Hopefully, or
We could decide
as
to
we've
look at it as
discovered-
sweet.
Yeah, because we've discovered by this episode it might just be crazy disrespectful, and they were like, "Fuck you, kids." So we don't know. That could be that as well. Let's be honest. So maybe. I don't know.
Serious question. Are we just taking you guys' research on like a joyride and just fucking stuff up for the pleasure of views, or are we taking you guys' work seriously? How do you feel, Brad?
I think it's being taken seriously.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, no,
Just checking in.
Yeah.
This is what we do most of the time in the office. It's just like, what about this? But what about that?
Yeah. Okay. Good.
I love anything macabre and kind of dark. We said it before when we've all sat down together. Like that really interests me. So that's why I guess earlier I was like looking at the criminal aspect and these weird things that are maybe a little bit more messed up, I guess, because there is fascination in that morbid curiosity of what humans are capable of kind of, I guess, doing to each other that we don't always see.
Yeah. I mean, I pulled up the spreadsheet of burials just to see if there was anything quirky with any of the decapitations. And one of the decapitations is through the face, which feels a bit more disrespectful than through the neck.
Feels intensely personal in a weird way.
Well, they say that with I used to be into serial killers. That sounds really bad, but like I have an interest in that kind of stuff because it's fascinating. And that's like a thing, isn't it? I don't think it's not that often that killers will like say stab to the face because there's something really disrespectful about that. It tends to show like a real sense of like anger and fury if there's a like anything to like the face. It's just something that and that made me wonder whether we can apply modern psychology on, obviously in the last 50 years there's been huge advances in psychology around murders, whether you can apply any of that to the work and how maybe humans act with things like, because you said like a face decapitation. Is that like when you see in a movie and there's like someone's head gets sliced through and you that slow motion drop?
The text says through the face to the cervical joint, so I would assume something like that kind of. I to the audio listeners, sort of a downward through the face, kind of to the neck.
Okay, so like across
kind
the
of cut.
nose, kind of.
Something like that. So it's hitting the base of the head, but it's going through the face rather than through the neck. But one
that could be a real shitty executioner, though.
No, so this is my devil's advocate moment here. Is this person had a lot of issues, so really severe osteoarthritis, really severe like hip problems. So I do wonder, like, it's a bad decapitation, but is that because it's not an execution? It's actually a put someone out of their misery kind of act of care.
Oh, and you don't, and maybe it's somebody who doesn't know what they're doing and
how to cut someone's head off. Like, is this a family member who's gone like, you're really suffering, you can't walk, your hips are completely screwed up. You've asked me to, make it easy for you.
Well, that got me thinking on another tangent. We have a very different view of how you treat the elderly today. And obviously, if you're unlucky enough, you end up in a nursing home with fucking dementia. This is really sad now. But like not remembering your family, not remembering your name, basically just kind of living out the rest of your life, just waiting, I guess. Some would say maybe, if you put somebody from the Viking Age or maybe probably any other time in history in our day and they looked at that, they'd be like, you guys are monsters. That's so cruel. Why would you keep these people suffering? Why wouldn't you just let them do the kind thing and move on? Like, even like we do with animals, if you have a dog that's suffering, you tend to have them put down because it's the kindest thing to do. Yet we don't necessarily do that with humans, particularly the elderly. So there is that mindset that's maybe different that you in Viking Age Scandinavia and probably like say in just past humans in general. Once people get to a certain age and they feel like they're a burden, maybe it is just a thing to check out. Or Atterstoop, as as it was on the Norse. Is it the Norsemen that had that?
Yeah.
I think it was in Midsummer as well, wasn't it? The movie.
Etterstup.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Where they throw themselves off the cliff.
Mm-hmm. But that's I think that's like a way of looking at like how a modern mindset to how you treat people that, if you take a step back and look at it, could be considered quite cruel.
Mm. There's huge disparity in the treatment of people who have reached in the Viking Age what would be fantastically old ages. So Osterberg, with the female in there is one of the female individuals in there is really quite old, and then they get one of the iconic Viking burials.
Yeah, and she had issues too. Like someone actively kept her alive.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then on the other hand, that example that I mentioned earlier, the woman in the fetal position that's being crammed into a really tiny grave, she was also, I think she might be the oldest individual in that cemetery.
Oh, wow. So
you get this,
talking like
this huge disparity.
70s, 80s?
I think she might be even pushing 80, yeah.
Oh, shit. That is old.
Mm-hmm.
In a Viking context.
Wow. But is it a culture that would I want to say off Nana, but that doesn't feel quite right. But is it a culture that would kind of save the burden if it? Because I guess we spoke about it before with infanticide, where if you have a child that's maybe not of able body or mind, maybe they would take them to the woods on a one-way trip.
I don't think there's anything consistently across the burial record which would indicate that all people or elderly members of the community were treated any better or any worse. I think it was on a very much an individual basis. You find some people that are quite old that get fairly standard burials. You get people that get fantastic burials, and then you get people that get atypical burials.
Yeah, I'd say the average age of death tends to be higher for the women than the men, but that doesn't necessarily inherently say anything about kind of how they treat old people. But we do have enough people in that older category to suggest, they're not being offed.
Yeah. It's not just
time to go, Nana.
Nana, you've hit 50. That's it.
There tends to be more deaths in the 30 to 50 kind of category, but we do have enough people who look like they're older than 50 to suggest like when people survive, they're not, being treated negatively necessarily. There's still people dying older.
Mm-hmm.
That's interesting.
It is. But again, I guess it probably comes down to like a burden aspect. If you're, still able to kind of help out on, you've got your marbles.
But you're thinking from a very functionalistic perspective though, Dan, because isn't it sometimes worth taking care of people and keeping them around whether or not they can actually fulfill tasks? Because they can still, even if you can't walk and like carry stuff, you can still remember, you can still tell stories if you have like functioning. There are a lot of other things that wouldn't necessarily be visible in the material evidence that you could do.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think this might have come up last time as well, because I remember looking through my spreadsheet and there was one person who had like a developmental disorder from childhood who survived to mature adulthood. So it's not an inherent, I guess, predisposition that, if you're a burden, you're inherently sort of killed off early.
Yeah, I'm just thinking more of a society that doesn't have supermarkets. So if your if your crop yield wasn't good, your horse was shitty and wasn't, one of the good ones, then maybe you had less food. And
But perhaps if you weren't able-bodied, you could still spin thread and possibly weave fabrics, and you could trade that for food.
maybe, yeah. I just
Possibly.
yeah, but
I'm just like, I'm trying to play devil's advocate too, because I think that's also one of the loops that we can get kind of stuck into when we're thinking about Viking Age stuff, is that like, unless you could do physical manual labor, then you weren't of use. But I think that is perhaps a slight misrepresentation of the society.
Yeah, I don't think that it's that those jobs aren't valuable. I think that unfortunately, when possibly if hunger hit and starvation hit and times got particularly hard, I would guess humans could be quite shitty, and those things would maybe not hold as much weight as being able to gather more food, or just not being maybe as strong as somebody else who could then take advantage of that weakness and be like, I'm going to actually just eat the food, you're not. That's kind of where my mindset is, because I'm thinking we would, it's probably society that very much is based on the stronger and fitter you are, the kind of better in some instances.
Devil's advocation, given that we've raised this already, is that a very capitalist way of thinking that didn't inherently necessarily exist before?
I think that it's not even a human thing. I think it's an animal instinct that if food was short, because if you look at like wolves or any pack animal or any animal, if the food became short, the strongest and the hierarchy would eat, and the weaker left to die. You look at when you have puppies, and the weakest one is kind of cast out and left to.
But that's different.
Yeah, so actually I saw something quite relevant to this the other day about how I think it's orcas. If an orca calf dies, the mother will carry the corpse of her orca child across sort of oceans. And it's a case of, if we were just fundamental animal principles, survival, why would this animal spend the energy bringing their calf when they could be sort of swimming faster, getting to food faster, if they just left it behind? And it's that kind of thing of grief is actually part of lots of different animals' sort of emotional systems and whatnot. So it's that kind of thing of like, we all have these emotions, and grief can do weird things with different things.
Yeah,
but would the calf do that? Would the orca do that if she was starving? That's because I'm trying to go. I'm talking about like the extremes of like, if it was a particularly bad winter and you were starving, I think that changes things in humans. Like, we can all be nice,
but Dan,
we've got plenty of food, and you can carry your young. You can look
at present examples happening right now in countries we'd like not to think about. We can look at the situation in Gaza, and we can look at the situation in Sudan, and we can see that is explicitly not the case. From material evidence of what is happening there, we can see that is not the case. That people don't succumb into hierarchical, only the strongest gets the food.
I think we can find enough examples across the archaeological record, not just in the Viking Age period, but of people really going, what would in this, late stage capitalist framework be absolutely irrational behavior, or overly sentimentalized? But there are examples where people have helped people in their community survive for years and years and years, and then given them very wonderful burials, and there's treatment that is evident in life and death. And I think we come across enough examples archaeologically, but even in the Viking Age. So just to give an example of how one community might have thought about difference in ability and difference in age, come back to Fjölkinga. It's a really fascinating cemetery. But there's a correlation between amber objects, amber beads that are found in really small child burials. So again, we're talking the infants, and then a group of adult burials. And these adult burials all tend to be quite old and have either developmental degenerative disease or other kinds of pathologies that have existed for quite a long period of their later life. But they've been consistently looked after to reach an older age. And there's this Lotta Meisholm has suggested that this connection between these two groups suggests that amber is seen as a protective substance, and both young children and older adults who have different abilities, different needs, also need this protection that amber can afford. I've had a look to see whether this translates outside of Fjölkinga, and it doesn't perhaps hold up as much as it does at Fjölkinga. This is something that I'm writing about in my PhD. But this is super interesting. And in that cohort, to bring it back to atypical burials in a really interesting way, in that cohort at Fjölkinga, I think you're going to like this one. There is an individual who they're neither prone nor supine. They have literally been folded in half in their burial.
Oh.
So their legs are flat in the grave, and then from the waist down, they have been tipped.
Whoa.
That just reminded me of a really interesting one in England, which again, late Anglo-Saxon burials are considered very standard. It's, you're in a coffin, you're laying down flat, that's kind of it. You've got no stuff. There is one stone coffin where a child is sat upright in the coffin.
Huh.
So it's, you do have fun, quirky things sometimes.
Wow.
That's really interesting. But also, like, maybe I'm just an extremely stiff person, but I'm like, maybe they were really flexible in life, or have they literally broken the body? Because I'm trying even now to like bend over I can't do it.
When you're dead, I don't think those things matter as much, Mags. I think that it doesn't matter if you can or can't. It got
me curious about the use of force to make that happen. But that's really interesting.
Yeah, they really want them to be in that position. Any hypotheses why?
I've honestly been trying to follow this out for months, and I've been thinking about how does rigor mortis affect the body. Whether the rigor mortis had set in and they realized that they couldn't fit them in the grave in this rigor mortis position, so they started folding them and then something just snapped and they went, or whether there's this is an intentional thing, or it's unintentional, or they just panicked and they were like, that'll do.
Whoops.
Yeah.
Well, this is an interesting point actually about again, that balance between what's intentional and what's kind of for the situation. So what Brad's saying about was it too small? Did they have to squish them? There's one coffin in Denmark which is only 30 centimeters wide. So this person's really squashed in there. And you could say oh, they really didn't like that person, or did someone just screw up and make a coffin that was too small and they just had to squidge them in? And then there's also a burial in England
you have to get
but there's a burial in England where they've carved kind of a coffin into some chalk, and I've shown this to Brad, and the bit for the body is quite spacious, but there's a little nook for the head that's so tight, it's so remarkably small, and it's a question of was that to kind of hold their head for protection? Was it because they just kind of shoved the head in there? Did they make it too small? And they were like, we haven't got time to make this any bigger, sort of thing. So you sometimes have to balance what is an intentional act of respect or disrespect versus, we ordered the wrong size, which is something that we can all relate to,
Mm-hmm. Boy, can I will admit that I am a sucker for interpretive lenses that accounts for unintentional fuck ups, let's say. Where I'm just like, you know what? Humans are flawed. We always have been and we always will be. And then sometimes it's like, shit, okay. Well.
That always reminds me, I think I've told this story on here tons of times, and probably to all three of you, of the guy that I knew who was a grave digger, and he dug a grave for they didn't tell them that it was a bigger gentleman.
Oh no.
When it came time to put him in the ground, he didn't fit. And what makes this story worse, this lovely guy, he was like a council owned cemetery, and it does make it worse because it was like a black family who, so you can imagine, they typically would have like huge funerals, and there's a lot of people there, and he had to go through with his little, well, they couldn't take the JCB in because there were so many people there, so he had to go in by hand and make it bigger. And he said that basically a lot of them were just kissing the teeth at him because they were very unhappy that obviously you wish you would be, you're there to bury your loved one. And he was just said he was one of the most awkward kind of situations to ever be in, of just like having to go through and make this grave bigger by hand whilst everyone's very unhappy that you weren't told ahead of time that maybe it should be slightly wider.
But this like, and what Mags was saying is quite a good example of, I think there is a real tendency, which I think is understandable with how humans love stories and sort of fantasy and things like that, of we like to over romanticize and over mysticize and over exoticize the past.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not saying that like people in the Viking Age are exactly like us today, but they probably made mistakes. And the idea that someone made too small a hole in the ground is not, particularly far-fetched.
Mm-hmm. And digging a grave's really difficult. It's not that easy.
Yeah.
That's why.
And it all depends on like
your man always gets caught when he murders someone because he can't be asked digging the grave that deep.
Yeah, and it's like it depends on the time of year. It depends on the type of soil. It depends on your skill level, of your strength, the type of tools you have available. Like digging a grave isn't one thing.
Yeah. Okay, that's got me thinking. What about depth of these graves? Is that a thing? Is there a uniformity in depth? Obviously, today we're like 6 feet. That's a thing.
Yeah, so depth can be kind of tricky. There is a lot of variation, but it's kind of obscured by the fact that modern ploughing or ploughing at any point, or just environmental changes, the depth we find them at might not be the depth they were buried at. So yes, there's variation, but it's hard to say what's from then and what's changed over time.
Yep.
Okay. I guess that means they were deep enough, though.
It's kind of hard to say.
And there's also a question there of how deep is deep enough when, or how deep is necessary when you're also going to build something on top. So you might put a mound or a cairn on top of it, or you might make a wooden structure which signifies this grave. So how deep do you need to go in when actually you're going to have another 4 foot of earth or rock on top?
Yeah, and I guess humans are fallible as well. Some are lazier than others. I think we always forget that when talking about all this. It's like some people would be, yeah, that's enough. Some people would be,
it's fine.
Yeah, like, okay, we need to actually go deeper and make sure that animals aren't going to get to this. There is that is a thing. Humans aren't all equal as much as we may all like to think it sometimes.
No, you'd be absolutely devastated, wouldn't you, if there was some way of finding out 1,000 years later that you'd been buried in one of the just fine burials.
Oh.
That'll do.
Yeah, imagine finding out like you're not statistically like significant.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Or imagine finding out that like you're one fuck up, or you're like, oh shit, I'm gonna get so much shit for this. But then you find out 1,000 years later, it's like, no, this is actually a sign of how when they did it this way, they were like getting in touch with the gods. And then you're just kind of like, oh, thank God. No one noticed. I'm fine.
Yeah, that's fascinating because there will be instances of mistakes that we hold today as like, oh my God, that's so cool. That's like, they would clearly, I don't know, send in a message for Odin, but really it's just someone who is like,
I will say, I don't think this necessarily applies because, the field of archaeology is, to be fair, a fair like from a humanity perspective, a fairly recent field. But considering the tradition, not that this happened all the time with everyone, but considering that there was a tradition to, breaking mounds, entering graves in the Viking Age period, I do wonder if someone at some point during the Viking Age did go, I want to be buried in a kind of funny way, just in case someone comes inside, and they'd be like, what?
Well, we spoke about it last
Yeah.
time, didn't we? We were like, how would we want to be buried?
Yeah.
And me and Brad are kind of along the lines of like, well, whatever messes with future archaeologists would be great. But I think there's an interesting point there of like the idea of mistakes, because that's not just at the point of the Viking Age, that's also any interpretation that's happened since then. So, for example, I've been working on a cemetery, Hesselbjerg in Denmark near Aarhus, where for years and years and years, the cemetery plan has been presented as like left to right, because that's how someone read the original report, whereas it's actually top down. And that really changes the interpretation of the cemetery. Wow. So it's not just like a Viking buried someone in a weird way. An antiquarian came along and went, I think it's this. And that's the only literature we have, because sometimes they sell the graves and you have nothing, like you don't have the original grave. So you just have whatever notes came in the middle of you getting to it. So it's not just mistakes of the past, it's mistakes of any interpretation since.
Yep.
Okay, let's wrap up this. The
we've forgotten to ask him, Dan.
No, I've not forgotten.
But we forgot to ask him in the beginning.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So that they would get time. But okay,
just have to go on on the fly.
We've started doing a new thing, you see.
Yeah. So it's a new little question we like to ask for as long as we remember.
Yeah.
In a few weeks we'll forget, but we're gonna try.
We're gonna try.
But so we'll wrap up the main show and then we will ask some more. I want to know like the weirdest ones, the real messed up stuff. So we will get, if there are. We'll get into those. But the question we've been asking, I guess, for the last 2 weeks, so we're on a roll. This is number 3.
Oh, yeah.
Is if you had a time machine and you could go back to the Viking Age, what's the one thing you would like to learn? Just that's like, yeah, I'd like this. Like, this thing's been bugging me. Maybe it's about a burial, or maybe it's not even related to a burial. It's just something else. Is there anything that jumps out?
I mean, in a theoretical sense, I would probably just ask them my PhD questions and see if we can rattle that off super quick, get some notes done, back home in time for tea, let's write this up. But in reality, I don't think you could actually pay me enough to travel back to any other point in history, because history is terrifying.
Yeah.
Living in the Viking Age would have been frightening.
It's
fascinating but frightening.
Well, thanks for playing the game, Brad. Emma, what about you?
I'm going to carry that thread for a moment and then give a serious answer. But we were talking about this amongst some of the other PhDs the other day about like, which period of time would you go back to? And we were like, none of them, because we'd either get some sort of terrible disease or we'd give a terrible disease. Like health-wise, we don't match up. In terms of an actual I've had all my booster shots. I go back to the Viking Age. Part of me very specifically would like to figure out what on earth is going on with the bone pillow at Sebesund, because that will forever be my mystery. But more generally, one of my favorite artifacts from the Viking Age are these pendant molds where they've got Thor's hammers and Christian crosses. And I'd love to see the customer base for those shops and see if people are buying both or if people are buying one or the other or things like that. So I'd like to figure that out a bit more.
If I can salvage my answer as well.
I thought your answer was great, but please add on.
I was only kidding. But yes, you can have another go.
I would love to see how child and family relationships actually worked on a practical basis, because it's something that's so missing, and how families and how children were brought up and what that looked like in an actual physical sense and not just an archaeological sense would be fascinating to see those interpersonal dynamics in real life.
Brad, would you like to do that as a child?
No.
I love that you gave it a good think, though.
Yeah. But Emma, Brad, thank you so much for joining us again. And once the mysterious article comes out, you can come back and join us again. Is that a possibility?
Would love to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wonderful. These are always a lot of fun. They're always lighthearted and a good giggle. So I enjoy them very much.
Same. I love being able to slightly gang up on Dan a little bit.
Yeah, I don't mind. I do have to correct myself. I did say earlier that not all people are equal. People are all of equal value. I just meant as in maybe their effort. Not all people's effort.
People are equally
equal.
flawed.
Yeah. Yeah, but yeah. Yeah. Let's go
Just
with that.
go with it. I know that's not what you meant. Just go
But I
with it.
meant, yeah, people are all humans have equal value, but just not. They don't always try the same, put the same effort into everything they do, like burying things or people. But Brad, Emma, where can people find you or your work if you so choose to send people anywhere?
So my main one would be RK Emma on Instagram at the moment.
Brad?
Yes, I'm also on Instagram, ArcheoBrad14 on Instagram, and there is a link there as well to some stuff that's out
13
from
other
Emma and me.
13 other Archeobrads, eh?
14 is my special number.
Okay.
Oh, that's nice.
Is that because of carbon 14 or is that just a general thing?
I wish it was. I just love the number
Okay.
14.
You know what? I feel
Fair.
you because I really vibe with the number 15. That's like, it's my vibe. Yep. So I get it.
Archaeologists really love putting that in their handle, don't they? There's 3 of you here, and you've all got Archeo in your.
Well,
It just helps define the scope of the search.
yeah. I mean,
Okay.
previously I had just like my nickname growing up, and that didn't gain any traction at all because people were just like, "What?"
What was your nickname?
My nickname was a variant of what became eventually my middle name. My middle name is Kirby, so people called me the Curbster. So my handle was the Curbster.
I love Kirby's lovely. Kirby does remind me of the little cute.
I will
ghost that I
say
used to play as a
that
kid.
is not that's no thanks to my mom and dad. Some person in high school started calling me Kirby, and then everyone started calling me Kirby to the point that I actually legally added it to my name.
Wow! Oh, really?
Yep.
Why did they start calling you Kirby? Did you like puff your cheeks up
Because
and
my
blow on things?
my legal name is Margrethe, which is for you Brits, you just kind of go, there's an E at the end. That's weird. I'm just going to call you Margaret. And that's usually how it's supposed to go. But in the States, people were really weirded out by the TH and the E at the end. So they were like, what? So I started calling myself Megan just to have something to go by. And then I had a friend who just kind of went, no, I'm going to call you Kirby instead. And I was like, why? She was like, I don't know. But it kind of caught on.
Fair.
Yeah, to the point
You
where
went-
everyone called me Kirby.
You weren't like the champion at the game. I don't know. Do you guys have? It's Kirby. It's like a British game. Do you have it in Norway?
No, I'm more thinking of, the Nintendo
No.
thing.
So there's a legendary game that you play on the streets of the UK, and
Oh, no,
one
we
person
don't have
stands
that.
on one pavement, and the other person stands on the other pavement, and you have a ball, typically a football sized, and you throw it and you try and hit the curb. And if you can hit the curb and make it bounce back to you,
Oh.
that is Kirby. And if you can throw it so hard that you hit the curb and catch it, then that's like I think you get bonus
Wouldn't that
points.
be like CURBIE though, and not?
I don't know. I think we all spelled it with a K, but
Oh.
that's
I
like
know.
Emma. You look like you don't know what Kirby is.
No.
Do you, Brad?
I'm
No,
so
it's-
happy.
Yeah, I think this is what we did in Yorkshire before the internet, right?
I was
Yeah,
gonna
maybe
say,
it's just a Yorkshire.
is this a northern thing?
Maybe,
Yeah.
yeah.
It's
Poverty
extremely
thing, probably.
localized.
We didn't have Nintendo,
Yeah.
so we had to play.
Just like, we didn't do that in Hertfordshire.
Yeah, we just I thought everybody played Kirby. It's a great game.
Honestly,
I
my
think-
first thought was that everywhere I've lived has been way too trafficked for that to be a case. Someone's parents would have yelled at us way too often for that to have been a thing.
We also had if you lost, you got the ball kicked at you. That was part of it as well. There was like I don't know if it was that part of your rules, Brad. It was actually,
Oh yeah.
So
And
if
we still play that now, even though we're 30.
yeah, so if you lose, you have to like stand against a wall and just let your friends kick a ball at you. Yeah, called red ass or bare ass, and you just have to let them kick the ball at you. And if you flinch, everyone's like, you're soft. And it's like, well, no, you're kicking a ball at me. Of course I'm
No.
going to flinch.
On the topic not of atypical burials, but atypical pre-internet activities.
It was a great game. Bring it back. I
believe
say
it. Sounds
it was a
awesome.
lot of fun. But on that note, let's wrap this. Oh, yeah,
You can find me on
Max,
Instagram at RQMax, RQ with a
You
K.
did. I couldn't remember we did all the RPOs on that.
You didn't do yours, Dan. Go ahead.
For me, it's Daniel_Fire1. Horns voting for the business. The mead is out now, so go and check that out. A little selfless plug for the Horns voting mead we just released. And Nordic Mythology podcast across the board. Well, yeah, like, subscribe, go to YouTube, and you can see and watch the episodes. They're a lot of fun. And go play Kirby. Look it up. A lot of fun.